Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving straight into how modern genomics is completely dismantling the centuries-old colonial story of Caribbean identity. We're unpacking some truly fascinating research from Don Rivera Diaz, who argues that the history we've been taught about the Caribbean is, well, fundamentally flawed. And the amazing part? DNA science is now proving it, literally one genome at a time. It's a massive shift in how we understand human migration. So let's rewrite some history. To get to the truth, we first have to confront the myth. We've all been taught some version of this really neat, tidy colonial story, right? Columbus arrived, the native populations basically vanished into thin air, Africans were brought over in chains, Europeans settled, and the resulting people were simply mixed. The implication was that they were essentially starting from scratch with absolutely no deep roots. But the author argues this isn't just a metaphor, it is a complete lie. It's a carefully constructed story of erasure that modern DNA science is actively tearing down. Because that whole story of complete eradication and blank slates is completely shattered by genomic reality. When scientists actually look at the DNA of modern Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, and Cubans, they absolutely do not find a simple, recent mixture from colonial conquest. Instead, they find incredibly resilient ancient lineages. We're talking massive global connections and an undeniable, epic story of human survival. Take the word mixed, or mestizo, for example. It wasn't even originally a biological term. It was a bureaucratic tool. Colonial administrators basically invented it for legal and social control. It was just a convenient way to flatten thousands of years of rich, complex human history into a tidy little administrative box. It implied Caribbean people were this brand new creation, born only from European contact. But modern genomics completely destroys that framing. It reveals a past that is staggeringly deep. When we look closely at the specific genetic markers, the African component of Caribbean DNA is far from a monolith. It spans West Africa, Central Africa, East Africa, and even North African lineages that actually predate the Moors. This geographic breadth is huge. It reflects way more than just the routes of the transatlantic slave trade. It reveals tens of thousands of years of incredibly complex pre-colonial trade networks and human migrations across the African continent, long before Europeans even knew the Americas existed. And the really crucial point here is the sheer age of these connections. We're talking about sub-Saharan African maternal lines found in the Caribbean today, like haplogroups L2 and L3, that trace back anywhere from 30,000 to 70,000 years. I mean, just pause and think about that for a second. 70,000 years. Carrying one of these markers means your direct maternal line stretches back to the very origins of our species. It is an ancient, profound heritage. And then there's the Taino people. Colonial records confidently declared them totally extinct by the 16th century. Well, it turns out, the conquerors were just terrible at record keeping. DNA science definitively proves that indigenous Caribbean markers persist today. Modern genomes of Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, and Cubans show measurable, surviving indigenous DNA. These markers were passed down primarily through maternal lines because indigenous women survived colonialism in profound ways that were just completely ignored by the written history of the conquerors. Which brings us to a really powerful quote from the research. The Taino were not erased. They became us. It perfectly captures the reality. Indigenous lineages didn't just vanish into thin air. They were absorbed, they adapted, and they were carried forward by survivors. The people didn't disappear at all. They are still here, living right now in the genetic code of modern Caribbean populations. Now, here's where it gets really wild. One of the most astonishing genomic findings is the presence of Pontic steppe ancestry. Just imagine, how does DNA from nomadic herders living north of the Black Sea thousands of years BCE end up in the Dominican Republic? Well, it didn't travel directly. It moved slowly, westward into Europe over millennia, weaving into the Iberian Peninsula, before eventually crossing the Atlantic. The people carrying it had no idea. They were just living, adapting, and moving across the globe generation after generation. And this complexity completely reframes the Iberian connection, too. We tend to assume the Spanish and Portuguese who arrived were this homogenous group, but they were already a profoundly mixed people. The European ancestry in Caribbean DNA is actually a palimpsest, like a heavily layered ancient manuscript. The Iberian Peninsula was home to Phoenicians, Romans, Visigoths, Berbers, Arabs, and Jews. In fact, many who fled to the Americas in 1492 were crypto-Jews and Moorish converts, desperately fleeing the Inquisition. It adds these beautiful, ancient human layers to the migration story. Now, before we draw absolute final conclusions, the author does point out a major caveat.
the science isn't finished. Population genetics is still a pretty young field. Right now, the reference panels, those massive databases that companies use to assign your ancestry percentages, they are heavily weighted toward European populations. And this skew naturally limits the overall genomic accuracy for everyone else. The stark reality is that Indigenous American and African samples are severely underrepresented in these scientific databases. In practical terms, this means the incredibly rich Indigenous and African ancestry that is already present in Caribbean genomes is highly likely to be undercounted in current estimates. We're really only seeing a fraction of the true depth of these roots. This is exactly why representation in science is absolutely vital. As these databases grow, and crucially, as more Indigenous and African communities participate in genomic research on their own terms, the picture we have today is only going to sharpen. And when it does, the story will almost certainly reveal roots that are even deeper and older than what we currently understand. So I really want you to think about the personal, emotional impact of this data. What does it actually mean for a person today to discover that their maternal line is 34,000 years old? Or to find out that their paternal ancestors were riding across the Eurasian steppes 7,000 years ago? Or to realize that the ancient indigenous ancestry that every single history book said was gone is still right there, alive and encoded in their very cells? It means a profound reclamation of self. It empowers individuals and entire communities to completely reject the colonial definition of identity. It proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that you are not merely the product of colonialism. You are older than colonialism. You're the direct continuation of lineages that survived everything history threw at them, from the Middle Passage to forced assimilation, and you are still here. Ultimately, we're witnessing a massive paradigm shift. For centuries, Caribbean identity has been defined by a narrative of loss. Lost languages, lost names, lost origins. Genomics is flipping that script entirely. It's transforming the narrative from one of eradication into an awe-inspiring story of survival. Extraordinary human survival, complex global mixture, and incredibly deep historical roots. So we'll leave you with this provocative final thought from the source. It's an open invitation to rethink identity entirely, not through the narrow, violent lens of colonization, but through the deep, resilient truth of human history written right into our DNA. If your DNA didn't begin with Columbus, who were you before the ships and chains? Thanks for exploring this remarkable genomic journey with us today.